Iowa, a place where people come together and share a meal, a story, or a small-town connection that goes back generations. Potluck dinners, beers at baseball games, the neighborhood smells of backyard barbecues, and the familiar refrain of, "Hey, what's that on the smoker?" We come together to tell stories under the hot summer sun, waiting for rain to stop, or start, or the seasons to change. While so much has changed, thanks to COVID-19, even with our social distancing, the food we grow and raise here in Iowa will always bring us together. Hi, I'm Lori Johns. Maybe like you, I grew up here and I'm a lifelong Iowan. But maybe not like you, I grew up on a livestock farm. I know how much farming has evolved. It's a lot more diverse than when I was a kid, when, like so many others, I was out feeding pigs, walking beans, and begging to go into town to meet my friends at the swimming pool. Iowa has long been the #1 pork-producing state in this country, and nearly a third of the nation's pigs are raised here. And while there may be a pig farm in every county in this state, how many of you have been on one? Only 2% of Iowans can call themselves a farmer these days, yet farming is one of the most essential jobs in the state. While most may have lost their connection to farming, we must not lose our connection to people who work the land and raise the food that we all need. My many years working as a TV news anchor and reporter taught me that the lens through which many view farming and farmers today needs updating. Let's change that. I invite you to join me to get to know your food and the hardworking men and women who raise it for us all. It's time for ChopTalk. Iowa, our home. Whether we've left to start a job, it seems we always end up back here to raise our families, enjoy each other's company, and complain about the weather. Whether the skies are sunny or rainy, the temperature hot or cold, it seems there is one thing clouding our view on farming. It's the simple fact so few of us farm. We drive down the interstate and we see the windmills, the dots of trees in the distance that signify farms, and we see random buildings so different from what our grandfathers described. This is where so much of our food is raised these days. We do like our food, and meat in particular. Did you know that Americans eat more than 65 pounds of pork each year, with bacon alone being 17 pounds of that? Yet few of us have been on a modern pig farm. How are animals raised? Who are the people raising them? And why do they choose that life? How do they do it? What goes on in those barns anyway? These days, COVID-19 has impacted our way of life in so many ways. I'm sure you've noticed at the grocery store that coronavirus has impacted the availability and the price of the world's most popular protein source, pork. A current economic study from Iowa State University shows Iowa pig farmers will lose $37 per pig this year by the time they're ready for market. When you add it all up, it's about a $2 billion loss for the state that leads the nation in pork production. When getting that pig to market was stalled as COVID swept through packing plants, so too the supply chain that kept affordable, plentiful pork on a grocery store shelves. That was also stalled. It's not just numbers or pigs. It's people we're talking about here. People like Mike Paustian. Like many independent pig farmers, Mike grew up on a farm. But, like many of us, his journey wasn't a straight path down that gravel road back to Walcott. He took a detour. He got a PhD in biochemistry from Minnesota, but that job brought him back to Iowa.
For my postdoc, I ended up at the National Animal Disease Center back in Ames and just loved it there. Really enjoyed working with the folks there, doing some great work, looking at all different kinds of diseases and all different kinds of animals, and really enjoyed making a contribution that way. But once our first child was born, my wife, who's also from a farm in southwest Minnesota, we kind of started talking about what we wanted for them, and we both felt really strongly about having the opportunity to grow up on the farm. And even though things were going great in the lab, we decided, let's move now while the kids are still going to be young, and so they can have that opportunity too. So that's kind of what precipitated the move back. And it's been great. We've been back for over 10 years now, and just seeing the kids grow up on the farm and seeing them have the same opportunities that we did really makes it feel like it was good timing, and we're really glad that we did it.
Well, I'm jealous. This is a beautiful spot, and what a great place to be a kid and to be a farmer. But farming is not easy, certainly not in this day and age. How has it changed, you would say, from maybe your family's day, back in the day, previous generations, to where you are now?
Yeah, I think one of the big ways that it's changed is just the amount of information that's available and that farmers have to process and deal with. Back when Grandpa was farming, hard work could directly lead to success. You could work your way through most problems. And to his credit and to the generations before him, they worked through whatever problems they faced. They were able to put their heads down and work through it. I think what's different now is that hard work alone doesn't necessarily cut it anymore. We also have to be risk managers. We have to manage volatility in the markets. We have to pay attention because now the things that go on in China have a direct impact on our bottom line, and who would have thought that? But we're in a global economy now, and so we need to pay attention to what's going on globally. And then we also need to pay attention to the fast progress that's being made in all the different fields that we rely on, whether it's agronomy, whether it's genetics, whether it's herd health. It's just the pace of progress is so fast now that it's literally impossible for one person or even a couple people to stay on top of all the different fields that we need to be experts in, essentially, to be successful. And so it's a lot of it has become finding great partners that you can work with. We work with a veterinarian for our herd health. We work with a nutritionist for figuring out our diets for our animals. We work with an agronomist. It's finding those great partners are key to success now, I think, because as many hats as farmers have to wear, and we have to know a little bit about all these things, but there's not enough hours in the day for us to be experts at that. And I can relate to that directly because when I was in the lab, I was an expert in a very, very small slice of science. With the particular bacteria that I was working on, I knew a lot about that. But in farming, we have to be a lot more broad with our knowledge.
That's right. So here was your day spent as a scientist on this one thing, or on this one specific, pursuing this area, and now, like you said, multiple hats.
Yep.
And then the things you can't control, like coronavirus.
Yeah. And I guess you could say that farmers have somewhat regular training in dealing with the unexpected when it comes to the weather. But at least there, even the weather is somewhat predictable. We know when it's going to be warm generally. We know when it's going to be cold generally. So we wish we knew when it was going to rain. That would be useful. But it's certainly gotten to the point where you have to be nimble and you have to be able to change your plans quickly when circumstances dictate it. And certainly COVID has been a case of where all farmers, but especially hog farmers, had to very quickly adapt to a situation that changed dramatically in a very short period of time.
And things don't move immediately. How far out when you're making a plan? It's a 10, 11-month cycle. It's more than that. You how far back before you even put up the barns, to make that plan?
Right. Yeah. Putting up a barn is a very long-term investment. Modern hog barn has computers in it. Everything's controlled to make sure that the environment is just perfect the way the pigs want it to be. And, it's usually the expected lifespan of that is going to be, 30 plus years. And so that's a major investment for a farm to make. And so you're kind of making sure you have enough barn space for the pigs that you're planning to produce. And then once you're at a point where you're ready to start raising those pigs, it is about a 10-month process from the time the pigs are bred. It takes about almost 4 months for the gestation of those pigs. Then they're born, and it takes another 5 to 6 months for those pigs to get to market weight. So it's a 10-month process. So when these coronavirus disruptions hit, we've already got a 10-month pipeline full of pigs moving through here, and so it's hard to quickly adapt to that. We can't just say, okay, oh, we're just going to raise fewer pigs. Well, the pigs are already on the way. That train has left the station. So it quickly turned into, okay, what do we need to do to keep all these pigs comfortable and find room for them until we can get them to market. So that quickly became a challenge, but fortunately, we had a lot of good help to point us in the right direction.
So what was that right direction? When COVID hit, just like all of us, farmers were cut off from their usual way of doing things. So they turned to experts at Iowa State University and folks like Dr. Chris Rademacher, once a farm kid, now a veterinarian and associated director at the Iowa Pork Industry Center. Dr. Chris says it came down to supply chain on the farm, because shutting it all down wouldn't benefit you, the consumer, or the farmer, or the pig, as it turns out.
Obviously, our goal there was just to try to provide a myriad of solutions for producers depending on what their situation was through the whole COVID-19 situation that they've been dealing with.
Right, because you want something that's good for the pigs, good for the farmers, good for the people overall.
Absolutely.
And the grocery stores, keeping that meat on the shelves, because
That's right.
Iowans like the bacon.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Absolutely.
that's how that goes. Well, let's break down some of these individual
Sure.
parts, okay? Now, I grew up on a hog farm bazillion years ago. Don't want to date myself, but I know how much things have changed. So for folks there's a lot of people out there listening, especially who've never even been on one, much less a farm. Let's break down maybe some of the changes. Why don't we just start with, sow, how long does that take? And how long to get that pig to market?
Yeah, you bet. Great point. So generally when the females are ready to be bred, once they go from breeding, it's 114 days. So the old moniker was always 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days, right? That's 114 days until that sow farrows. She'll farrow, and she'll hold on to her piglets now, I would say today, somewhere in and around 21 days, okay? So 21 days after the pigs are born, then they're weaned. They're generally taken to a couple of different situations. One is called a 3-site stage. So you got the sow farms and the baby piglets are in one phase, and then they transition to a nursery. So it's a building where all these weaned pigs get put together. They're kind of grown in there for about 8 weeks. Generally, they'll come in at about 10 pounds and they'll go out about 50 pounds. Then they'll go out into what's called a finishing floor. Those are a lot of the 3-barn, 4-barn sites you see as you drive around Iowa. And in the finishing phase, they'll be there from 50 pounds until they reach market, which is probably somewhere between 275 and 300 pounds. So generally that takes somewhere in the vicinity of 17 to 20 weeks in that finishing stage. So there'll be 8 weeks in the nursery. They'll be in the finishers for 17 to 20 weeks until they're big enough to go to market.
Sure. And what do they eat? Because that's another part of that whole sustainable cycle,
You bet, absolutely. I actually think pork was doing recycling before recycling was even cool, right? So,
right.
So really, primarily here in Iowa, they're in a corn, soy diet, and then they get some vitamins and some minerals, and some very similar things that you and I would take in our, in our vitamins or mineral mix, complete vitamins we take in the morning, right? So they get all that packaged together, and it's fantastic, right?
But their diets had to change because even though today's pigs grow fast, farmers needed to buy some time and slow down that growth because the packing plants were stalled out by COVID. So they did what Iowans do best. They innovated.
Actually, some excellent work done by 3 of our nutritionists here, Dr. John Patience, Dr. Nick Abler, Dr. Laura Greiner. We're looking at ways to be able to slow the pigs down by adjusting what actually went into the diets. Okay, so really the idea was to feed them a lot less energy, and maybe a little bit more roughage. So think maybe a little bit more of a fibrous type of diet, right? So they were able to make some of those adjustments. They did some very quick by university standards, really quick research, got put out into the fields, and that was one of probably the greater lessons that we learned is if we have to really slow these pigs down in order to keep them into that primary market weight so they don't get too big,
right.
we have had a chance to take those theoretical approaches that we were going to do, actually implement them, and found out in terms of the dietary work, we are able to very severely slow down. And the pigs eat the same amount of feed. They're still satiated. They still have full bellies. They feel good. They're just not growing as fast as what they normally would because we're just feeding them less energy-dense diets, more fiber, things like that. So to the pig, he or she doesn't really know any different to it. But certainly from a standpoint of keeping those pigs in that target weight range until we can open those markets back up and sell them, was certainly one of the things that we learned how to do. And we feel a whole lot more comfortable moving forward if we ever deal with a foreign animal disease outbreak, that we can quickly implement some of these strategies.
Also in the middle of this COVID-wrought farm crisis was Iowa Secretary of Agriculture Mike Naig. Managing the supply chain through the crisis became his job number one.
We've always kind of known as agriculture people that we're always thinking about the consumer at the end of this supply chain, right? I mean, if you ask why does a farmer get up and go to work every day and do what they do, care for their animals and get that crop in the ground and care for their crop, and it's all because at the end of this supply chain is a person who's either eating something that we grew, or maybe fueling their vehicle, or wearing something that agriculture produces. And so I think a farmer comes to work with that mentality. I think there's more consumers today who are looking the other way down the supply chain, and I hope have an understanding that the things that I need in the grocery store don't just magically appear there overnight, that they're connected to a supply chain. And then let's all look at the fact that they're connected to a supply chain that is manned by people all throughout that supply chain, whether it's what it takes to go to the field to put a crop in the ground, or care for livestock, or in the processing plant or the food manufacturing facility, the person that drives the truck, the person that stocked the shelves, the checkout person, and the person that pushes my cart to the truck to load my groceries out, that every one of those people in that chain are essential to us. We have a very efficient production system in the United States, and that serves us well. It's very sustainable. It's something that, again, it's developed over years, but no, there's not a lot of room in that supply chain. So, when we started to see packing plants, as you went through into April and you started to see some more positives in the packing plants, Iowa typically has about a processing capacity of about 150,000 pigs per day in the state of Iowa. On about the 1st of May, we were sitting at about only 60% of our normal capacity. Which meant that by the middle of May, we had backed up on Iowa farms about 600,000 pigs that would have otherwise been marketed. So, as those packing plants struggled to, in some cases, stay open, even we had some shut down, but as they struggled then to get back online and get back into production, we just have continued to carry this backlog of animals. Farmers have done, just about anything they can to deal with that. We've changed the feed ration for animals to slow down their rate of gain. Folks have literally gone out and found more building space to put animals in. We've found other ways to market. We've created programs together with the Iowa pork producers. Pass the Pork is one example of where we had producers donating animals that were processed in local meat lockers and then donated to food banks and food pantries, just doing everything they can to buy time and to deal with that backlog of animals that was on our farms. The good news today is I think we avoided that worst case scenario that we all envisioned. It's still bad, and there's still folks having to work through it, but farmers were able to really, frankly, get creative and come up with solutions that didn't require euthanizing as many animals as we feared that we might have to in the state of Iowa. And so that's been a bright spot. Processing capacity is coming closer to 100%, or is essentially at 100% now. And then you run a few of those packing plants on Saturdays and you start to actually catch up and deal with the backlog. So it's been an all-hands-on-deck moment for the pork industry.
Right. So speaking of, this is the tough part, of course, about what was being done, worst-case scenario. And all the backups are occupied. They've taken them as far as they can. Everybody's at capacity and beyond. So now you look at humane treatment of the animal, right?
Yeah.
Because they've got the new piglets coming or getting ready to be born. And packing them all in, more in,
right,
isn't necessarily good either. So talk to us about that euthanasia bit that had to happen.
Yeah, and that's right. You've got to then start looking at the animals and the care and the humane treatment of those animals. And so, we did have this situation again where you had about 600,000 pigs that had missed their ideal marketing window. You've got pigs coming behind them. And the last thing that we want to see is for an animal to suffer because of there's too many pigs in one building, or they can't get enough. The conditions aren't right for them to thrive. And so, unfortunately, we did have to think about it. We had to create a program to help producers. Provide some assistance to them as they looked at making some very tough decisions. And I've been describing it as they were forced to make tough decisions. This is literally the last thing that anybody wants to do. To have to euthanize an animal and dispose of it, it just seems like such a waste, right? And especially when you look in the context of so many people in need, right? That was the other thing that was hard to square, is you had growing food insecurity in the state of Iowa, and then we're out here talking about how farmers were having to euthanize animals, and it just, it's hard for people to understand that, but the reality is that you had to do it from a humane treatment standpoint. And so we did offer some assistance to producers as they were forced to, in some cases, euthanize animals and then dispose of them. Had to be done. It's the last thing anybody wants to do. People that get up and care for animals every day, the last thing they want to do is be on the other end of that and to waste that resource.
So now COVID, of course, is still very much around. But hopefully we're not in that situation currently, right? With that supply chain issue, or is that still going on, or are we over the hurdle?
We're definitely around the corner now. We go back now. Through the month of June, it took some time for those processing plants to get back online. And look, this is something again we need to talk a lot about. There needs to be I think some new partnerships formed and some better understanding about just who are the essential workers in this supply chain. And those folks that show up at these packing plants across our great state are very important to food and agriculture supply chain, and our producers, I think, have an increased appreciation for those folks too.
So when we think of that bacon in your BLT or that pork chop on the grill, it takes a village, really, to make it all happen. Not just now in this time of COVID, but always. Because livestock farming is about food and people. And it's also about the land and water, so environment will always need to be crucial to the cycle of sustainability, in good times and bad. So how does that all work? Especially here in Iowa, where there have always been more pigs than people? That's what we'll look into in our next ChopTalk podcast. Won't you join me? Meanwhile, to learn more about today's pig farmers and the work they do to put food on your family table, check out iowapork.org.